What's up, everybody? Dr. Ray, and today we are going to compare Apple versus Garmin in 2022 to talk about what I like about their top-of-the-end models. We're going to focus on the Garmin Fenix 7 and Apple Watch 7 to kind of compare, like, which should you get, what's right for me. I'm also going to look at the 945 Fenix 6, Apple Watch 4, and Garmin 935 and Fenix 5, just so we can see comparisons to the older models. And what I've done is I've listed out all the features that I care about and some of the other ones, like the main ones these watches have, and I've rated each of them as to how well they do it. So a 5 is the best, and then a 0 is they don't do it at all. So I've rated each feature to talk about which of these work. I've tested these watches extensively. My Fenix 7 is on order, but I've tested a 945 LTE versus an Apple Watch 7 extensively and been able to use these. So we're going to be able to do some really good comparisons. And I've had a 935, I've had Apple Watch 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. So I'm able to do a lot of comparisons and really talk about what I like about each of these watches. Try to be pretty unbiased because I like both of them. They each do some cool things, and I want to talk about that because just one feature might be the make or break feature for you that you care most about. All right, you ready? Okay, let's go. All right, so we're going to start at the top here. As I said, you can see my chart. So what I did is I created a Google spreadsheet so that I can keep this for record too. I have the Fenix 7, Apple Watch 7, Garmin 945, and I combined like the 945 and F6, even though there are some slight differences. I have the 945 LTE, 935 Fenix 5 because they were just so similar, and then I have Apple Watch 4, and I also included a phone because there are some things that a phone's just better than these watches for, and I want to talk about that too. But basically what I did, you can see like 5 here, so heart rate. And what heart rate means is that's basically like, do they calculate your heart rate? Do they have your resting heart rate? And yes, every single one of these devices does this. Fine. Heart rate is fine. Yes, the newer models have a new sensor, but to be honest with you, like the old sensors were fine. It's like, I don't know, they like talk about like the new Fenix and Apple Watch. They were like, we have a new heart rate sensor. And it's like, the old one was fine. I mean, unless you're like looking at this for like my resting heart rate, like medically, you probably need a chest strap anyway. So like as accurate as wrist-based heart rate is, like the heart rate is fine. And I've compared my personal one to a chest strap and it's always been equivalent. So I don't know, I guess on some people it's not, but like heart rate, they're all pretty much equal. So the older models, the Apple Watch 4 and Garmin 935, my opinion, their heart rate was just as good as the new versions. So, all right. GPS, again, I've never had a problem with the GPS on the old models of any of these devices. So like the Apple Watch 4 and Garmin 935 GPS was fine. It always worked well enough for me. So none of the new models, it's just gotten progressively like incrementally slightly better, but they're all good. Like I have no problem using the GPS on either of these old models. All right, running. For general running, outdoor, general running, I give all of them good marks again, all of them 5s. No problem with running with any of these watches. I did break running up though, because there are differences when we start to talk about like indoor running and long distance running. Like when I say long distance, I'm saying like the ultra marathon. So like when I say running, I'm saying anything marathon or lower. Running is great with all of these watches. No real difference. I'm able to calculate, you know, my GPS, my heart rate, my distance, look at my heart rate zones or whatever, like completely fine for any of those models. We get to indoor and treadmill running, we're starting to finally see some differences. So I give the Garmin Fenix 7, 945, and 935 all 5s for indoor running, and I give the Apple Watch only a 4. They all calculate pretty well and they all do a good job with distance, assuming I ran outside and like calibrated them. But the Garmin ecosystem allows you to actually edit on your watch how far you've ran. So if you know your treadmill's accurate, then you're able to calibrate that on the watch. And you cannot do that with Apple Watch. And I do think that's kind of a big deal when you're indoor running to be able to calibrate it like that. But to be honest, they're usually not off by more than like 0.1 or 0.2 of a mile. So you're talking about running 4, 5, 6 miles on a treadmill. It's really not a big deal to just be off by that little bit, but it starts to add up throughout the year. So I do like the calibrate feature. So I knocked Apple off for that reason. All right, we get to ultra marathon running. Like these are the long, like, you know, the super long distance races. And this is where Garmin completely outshines Apple. If you're into these kind of runs, you just can't go with Apple. Just the battery is just not going to last. That's where you ran into the issue with Apple. So I gave Garmin 5s, and I gave the 935 a 4 Fenix 5 just because the battery's older and they don't last as long as the newer models. You know, especially like I have a 935 and the battery's just not there as good as it was when I first got it. So I knocked that down just a little bit, but the Apple Watch I knocked down a lot because they can maybe work like a little bit, but in general, like I don't recommend them for ultra marathon type running. All right, biking. Now this is one where, again, Garmin outshines Apple completely, and let me tell you why. Apple Watch just doesn't work with power meters. So if you're a serious biker and you want to have like cadence sensors, and I haven't found that the Apple Watch plays well with any of my cadence sensors. Garmin just works seamlessly with any of that kind of stuff. But the big thing is the power meter, and that's really what most people will care about. So Garmin gets 5s, Apple Watches get 3s for this. All right, but we go to indoor biking, and it's basically the same thing. Because if you're using like Zwift or anything like that, you can't use a power meter with the Apple Watch at all. So yeah, Garmin gets 5s, Apple gets 3s for indoor biking. All right, but when we go to spin biking, because a lot of people do spin like they're doing like Peloton or whatever, I gave all the watches 5s. My wife uses her Apple Watch for the Peloton, and it's completely fine. So it's the Garmin watch isn't going to do anything different on a Peloton than the Apple Watch. So for spin classes, I think that any of the watches are just fine. So there you go. So that's why like I broke biking up into a few different areas just so we can see the difference. All right, outdoor swim. So for outdoor swimming, I give both the Fenix 7 Apple Watch, Garmin 945s, all 5s, even the Apple Watch 4 or 5. The 935 I give a 3 because it doesn't calculate your heart rate for outdoor swimming for some reason. They just decided not to add that feature even though the watch could technically do it. So since it can't look at your outdoor heart rate, I gave it a 3. You would have to wear a chest strap for that. All right, indoor swimming. For indoor swimming, same thing as outdoor. I noticed no difference. I gave all the watches 5s except the Garmin 935. So this is where you can start to see differences in like the Garmin 935 versus like the 945, Fenix 6, Fenix 7. Apple Watch, though, notice that their features last on the Apple Watch 4 and 7. All right, triathlons. This is one where we've got some differences between Garmin and Apple. When we're talking about a sprint triathlon, which is like the shorter distance triathlon, any of the watches are fine. When we talk about the longer triathlon, the Apple Watch is going to have more trouble having the battery last the whole entire time. So I really wouldn't recommend it for that. But the other big reason, which goes back to outdoor biking, is that the Apple Watch won't work with power meters for a bike. So any serious triathlete is going to have a power meter on their bike. So the Apple Watch is just completely out of the question for them for any length triathlon whatsoever for that reason. All right, now surfing, the tides shift a little bit. Apple Watch all of a sudden is the better one. And let me tell you why. So first of all, there are a few different reasons for surfing. I'm a big surfer. I'm not going to go through every single sport, and you can see how many things I'm going through here. I'm not going to go through every single sport. I'm just going to go through the main sports that I use, because that's what I'm doing this video for the stuff that I use it for. But for surfing, the Fenix 7, 945 regular, and 935, they don't have LTE, which for surfing is a huge deal. I've actually been injured in the water before and had to call for help. So having an emergency service on my phone is something is a must-have for me for surfing. So that's where the Apple Watch 4 and 7 get 5s, and the Garmin 945 LTE gets a 4. The reason the LTE doesn't get a 5 is because it doesn't work with Surfline Surf app. The Surfline Surf app is how you track and record your surf sessions, which the Garmin Fenix 7 and actually the Garmin Fenix 6 both work with it completely. But what that allows you to do is like record yourself surfing, like the video stuff. It's pretty important. So I had to knock it off for that reason. All right, stand-up paddleboard and kayaking. which are two sports that I do a lot of. I live right by the Intercoastal Waterway, so I do a lot of each of those. I also stand up paddleboard surf. For the same reason, all about the LTE. I gave the Apple Watches and the 945 LTE all fives. The rest I gave, while they do have a SUP and kayak app, I can't use it for emergencies, which is pretty important while I'm out there in the water. And I really, really despise bringing my phone or using my phone on either my kayak or my paddleboard. And the 935 doesn't really track those too well whatsoever. So I gave it a 2. It's just not as good as the 7 or 6 or 945 at all. All right, golf. I gave everything a 3 for golf. Besides the 935, I gave a 1. And the reason I gave it a 3 is I really can't not stand trying to track golf on my watch. I think it's like the worst thing in the world. And when I'm golfing, I have plenty of time and it's super easy to use my phone. I have my phone in my pocket and my phone is 1,000 times better for golf. So for golf, I just suggest you get a golf app on your phone and use it because they're really good and they're way better than your watch. But yes, you can use golf on your Garmin and you can use golf on Apple and it's okay, but phone is the clear winner. Same with weightlifting. I lift weights all the time. I honestly, like, while the Fenix 7, all the Apple Watches and Fenixes track weightlifting, and they also track your movement, try to like record how many strokes you do, how many lifts you do and stuff like that and what you're doing. It's not very good. And you're way better off just using an app on your phone. It's 10 times better. Everything about the phone is better for weightlifting. So I 100% use my phone and suggest my phone for weights. All right. We're getting down. We're like halfway through the list now. Now we're going to start to get just a few more sports, and then we're going to get like to all the other features. All right, CrossFit HIIT. I gave everything a 5. I don't think any of them do an excellent job of really tracking CrossFit HIIT other than like calories burned and stuff like that and heart rate. And so, but they're all equivalent, so they get all 5s. They all do it for CrossFit HIIT, but that is super important because I do a lot of those kind of workouts. Extreme hiking, like we do a lot of really long hikes out in the woods, and for that kind of hiking, especially like where you don't have phone service and stuff, the Garmin's completely outshine Apple Watch here. Just better graphical maps. They're just, especially like the Fenix 7, Fenix 6 are just designed for hiking. Like they do such a good job. Same with the 945. 935 doesn't do as good of a job, has a much smaller screen. But the other watches just do. There's so many great features for hiking, whereas Apple Watch just doesn't have those. For camping or short hiking, I gave all of them 5s though, because that's where like your Apple Watch does a really good job. LTE is probably working, and it does do a decent job for like hikes and stuff. It's just not comparable to the experience you get for a really long, like 3-day hike out in the woods with a Garmin device. And other sports, which is like everything, I just gave all 5s for. Half the sports that I do. I just like, even when I do like CrossFit or high intensity workout, I just pick cardio on any of the watches. I pick cardio for most things unless I want to track my GPS for some reason. So I just gave them all 5s, even though they're starting to each have like these specializations. A lot of times it's all just the same features, like we're tracking your calories, heart rate, and time. They're not really tracking much more, sometimes GPS, and that's about it for a lot of these other sports. So they're pretty equivalent for these other sports. All right, sleep. I think sleep has improved on all of these devices over the last 12 to 24 months. They've, both Apple and Garmin's ecosystems have had significant upgrades to sleep. So basically I gave everything 5s except the 935 because it hasn't had those Garmin upgrades. But the Apple Watch 4s had the Apple upgrades, and the 945s and Fenixes have all had the sleep upgrades, and they're pretty good. I'm pretty impressed with the sleep on both of them if you're into sleep tracking, that is. All right, readiness to train. Readiness to train is like, they're looking at something like HRV, body battery, or looking at your training performance and telling you like what you can do today. I think Garmin does a pretty good job of that. So I gave them a 3. I gave Apple Watch 0. I think there are problems with Garmin's ecosystem with that, in that it relies too heavily on outdoor running or outdoor biking with a power meter, because not everyone does that stuff, especially if you live like in the Northeast in the winter and it's absolutely 0 degrees outside, so you're like inside. So there are some issues with Garmin's, like training status, readiness to train, really any of their training features that rely on their VO2 max calculation, I have some issues with. But Apple Watch doesn't do it whatsoever. At least Garmin does it somewhat. As far as stress goes, I think Garmin 100% excels here. I gave them 5s, Apple Watch 0s. Garmin's stress feature that measures your stress is absolutely amazing. Body battery is an amazing feature. And I think I have body battery actually somewhere else here too, but maybe I just put it with stress because they're pretty much the same exact thing. But Garmin does an awesome job. I love this feature. This is a feature that it could be a make or break feature for people, I believe. This stress tracking. So Apple doesn't do it whatsoever. There are a few external apps that are starting to do it for Apple, but I don't want to talk about really external apps here yet when I'm talking about these two devices. Next one is HRV. I actually think these all do a pretty good job of calculating your HRV. I do like, the way Garmin calculates HRV is that it does it all the time through stress feature, but they don't give you the number. You have to physically like push the button to do a stress test on the device to get your HRV measurement. On Apple Watch, they take it periodically, or you can use the Breathe app and get an HRV measurement. So I probably think Apple does a better job of HRV because it does it throughout the day. But the way Garmin does it with body battery is good too. It's just harder to track over time like that. As far as ECG, EKG, while this isn't a feature that's really important to me, I know it's important to a lot of other people out there. And I do think it's kind of cool to have. Anyway, I think everyone should probably have this kind of feature, and I was really kind of surprised the new Fenix 7 does not have it, whereas even the Apple Watch 4 has it. So none of the Garmin models have it that I have compared here, and that's kind of disappointing because it's Apple's had it for 3-4 years now. So come on, Garmin, let's get on it. Surprisingly, there are a lot of people out there who either want to test this or do have something like AFib or other kinds of cardiac issues that would like to be able to have at least this at-home ECG feature. Some studies have shown that people who do like ultra heavy athletes are more prone to things like AFib. So you think they might want to have it on there. Flashlight, the new Fenix 7 and the Apple Watches do have flashlight features on them. I think it's kind of neat, I guess. I never really used it on my Apple Watch, so I don't know that it's that great. I always when I'm home, kind of use my phone, but I think it's a cool feature. It's a cool add-on. Why not? Have a flashlight. Cool. VO2 max, I've done comparisons of Apple versus Garmin VO2 max. They all do a good job of calculating your VO2 max. They're pretty equivalent in their numbers when they go up and down as well. I do like that Apple gives you decimal points with your VO2 max, whereas Garmin doesn't. So yeah, I think the VO2 max is good. All right, fitness TSB, which is what you get from Training Peaks. None of them do that, so I gave them all 0s. And I'll talk about that, but you can use external software for that. I'm going to talk about that on the next screen once I'm done with these. All right, training status, training load. I gave Garmin a 2, all the Garmin's 2s for these, and I gave Apple Watch 0 because Apple Watch doesn't do it at all. Garmin does do it, but Garmin relies on your VO2 max score. And it relies on a recent VO2 max score. So what happens for someone like me is that in the winter, I stop training outside. And I even live where it's warm. It'll be 70 degrees on Thursday, and maybe I'll train outside on Thursday, but it's cold today. It's in the 40s, and I do not train outside when it's cold. I got a treadmill at home. I got a bike at home. I got weights at home. I got an elliptical at home. I literally train indoors in the winter, all winter long. So what happens is that my training status, training load for Garmin is completely useless. It actually stops functioning. After a few weeks, it literally just stops functioning because I haven't worked out outside. So I only give Garmin a 2 for that because that's very problematic that it relies so heavily. They either need to have it not rely on VO2 max, they need to change it around. My personal opinion is that it should rely on trim score, but that's not how they do it. I've talked to First Beat about this, and they like the way they do it. So yeah, I don't find it very useful whatsoever. Training intensity, I think Garmin does a good job of calculating that. I gave them 5s. I gave Apple Watch 2 because they do a much less job around training and training intensity. But I do think you can glean that kind of information from what Apple gives you. Just it's much more clear with Garmin. Pulso X, all the last gen and new gen Garmin and Apple Watches do this, so that both the 7s and the Apple Watch 6 and the 945s do it. The old 935 Apple Watch 4 does not do Pulso X. How useful Pulso X is, I'll leave that up to you. I personally prefer a finger one if I'm doing it medically, but it's nice to have it on the watch, and I do have it turned on for my watches, although it is a battery drain on your watches. Respiration, Apple doesn't do this, but the 945 and Fenix 7 do this. They give you respiration. Again, this is one of those features where I'm like, how useful is this? I'm not sure. Maybe if you're doing high altitude training, which I don't do, but it's there. I mean, I'd rather have more features than less features, even if I'm not going to use them. Steps, they all do steps. Yeah, I mean, they all do steps. It seems fine. I don't know. I don't care much about steps. I do like to look at it over time. I don't care if it's like 100% accurate. I care that it's reliable in that, like, it's either reliably good or it's reliable in that it's consistent with itself, so I can look at trends over time. But they all do steps, they all do calories, again, just like steps. I actually do think calories are important because the watch does calculate your calories based on your heart rate, so you can see, like, over time, this month am I burning more calories, like what was I doing? Like, those trends of calories are actually very important, so I do like that. Music, the newer Apple, all the Apple Watches do music that I have from the 4 on here, and all the Garmin's do music except the 935. So they all do music slightly differently, but there are many options for each of them that I like. I actually mostly use music. Like when I did the 935 music, I had to pay for Spotify. So I did have to pay for a service. For the Apple Watch, I actually just use Pandora, which is free. So it's free, or it's costs less on my Apple Watch to use Pandora. But I also have LTE on the watch, so I was able to download it. But yeah, I did have to pay for Spotify on the Garmin device when I tested out the music. All right. So yeah, when I run now, I wear both watches when I run. So I have music. I always use my Apple Watch. I use Pandora. Just because it's free. All right, LTE, obviously both Apple Watches and the Garmin 945 LTE. This for me is a make or break feature. While I have both watches, if I only had to choose one, I would have to choose Apple Watch for the reason that I'm a big surfer, and when I'm in the water, I want the emergency feature. Or I could choose the 945 LTE. Same with emergencies. I only gave emergencies to the 2 Apple Watches and the 945 LTE because if it's an emergency and I have my phone, then I'm using my phone. If it's an emergency and I don't have my phone, the watch is useless. All right, messaging. Gave the Apple Watches 5s because the messaging on Apple Watch is a smartwatch. Apple just clearly dominates. It's awesome. 945 LTE, I gave a 3 because when I tested the 945 LTE, the messaging is a little funky. Like, I can message my emergency contacts, but it was like a kind of like stop the workout and just was like problematic to do. It was not easy as saying like, hey Siri, send this message, while I'm surfing. I really couldn't do that. I could get messages from my emergency contacts though, but it just wasn't the same. Like, I wasn't even getting like work emails, which could be important while I'm surfing. Just, it's nice to have, but I have little kids and I need something for emergencies all the time. As far as like messaging on the other Garmin watches, I gave a 1 because you can, like, if your phone's there, you can kind of use it for messaging, but it's really not that great. So I just gave them a 1, which I'm really shocked that the latest Fenix doesn't have an option for LTE on it. All right, battery life. I 100% give all of the Garmin devices a 5 because it's just so much longer. But I'll be honest with you, I did knock down the Apple battery life, but for my personal use, and I think for like most people, like it'll last for like 2 days, the new Apple Watch 7. I just need it to last a day, and it lasts like 2 or even 3 days. So like battery life is fine. I just throw it on the charger every night. I don't sleep with my watch, so um, I think it's fine. Like the battery life is fine for me. It would be much better to have longer battery life for those people doing like the ultra marathons and stuff. That's why I knocked it down. It definitely does not last as long, but it does last days now. The older devices like the Apple Watch 4, it didn't last as long. It was more like a day. But I even gave like the 935 a 5 because when it first came out, and I've heard of people where their 935s lasting longer than their 945, probably because of like things like oxygen level and stuff. But like they have it turned on the 945. But the 935 battery life was great. My 935 still kicking, still works, still great battery life. All right, overall health. I gave all of them 5s except the 935 because the 935 is lacking some of the features. Like the new Fenix 7 has like a nice like health feature, like you hold it for 2 minutes and it gives you like a picture of health. The Apple Watch does a great job of giving you like your HRV throughout the day and other things. Like I just think they both in different ways give a great picture of overall health. As far as voice controls, which surprisingly are pretty cool, like when you're running and you can, or like when I'm surfing and I can just talk into my, because I can't type, my fingers are too cold. It's nice to just be able to say, hey Siri, like do this, like send this message to my wife that I'll be home in 20 minutes and stuff like that. Like that is nice. So obviously the Fenixes I gave 0 because they have no voice controls, and Apple Watch I gave a 5 because they have it. And then controls like touch button. I gave the new Fenix, the Fenix 7, a 5 because it's got touchscreen and button controls, which is like my dream. I've been like waiting for that forever. So I'm so happy that that's finally there. Apple, I gave 3s, and the rest of the Garmin's I gave 3s, just because they're limited. Like Apple Watch is pretty much only touchscreen. They do have some buttons you can kind of use on the side, but it's not very good. And then the other Garmin's are only buttons. There was no touchscreen, and I sometimes do like the touchscreen. You kind of get used to it on Apple, like just like especially when you get a message, like just swiping it up or down. So I gave them all 3s. And then you can see how I rated each of these watches. Like when I went through and looked at all of these features, like what were the totals? So this is how you like can compare. And what's really, really fascinating is that when I look at the highs, so like the Apple Watch 7 and Fenix 7 are only 0.1 difference from each other. 0.15, I guess, to be technical. From a 397 to 382. So very almost even. But the most surprising thing was that the highest rated one, even though it's only a little bit, was a 4.1 Garmin 945 LTE, is rated higher than the Fenix 7 for me. And why is that? Because it's got LTE. And LTE is a make or break feature for myself. So not only was it rated higher, like here, one of the features that made it rated higher is a make or break feature for me. So it's like, wow. Looking at these, I think like, wow, it's kind of impressive. And then what's even more interesting is you look at the older watches, the Garmin 935, we're literally talking about like, are we at 5-6 years old technology right now? It's only 1 point lower than the 945 and new Fenix 7. It's literally only 1 point lower out of 5, which is 20% lower. So that's kind of crazy it's that effective. So if we said 3.97 was 100%, this would be 80% of it. Like the 935 has 80% of what the Fenix 7 has, which is kind of crazy to think about when it's a 5 or 6 year old technology. Obviously there's lots of hardware upgrades and stuff, but that probably tells me, and same with the Apple Watch was even higher, was hardly lower, and Apple Watch 4 probably tells me that these older devices, we're at a point now in technology between both Apple and Garmin where the next generation of devices is really a hardware upgrade. It's kind of like when you upgrade your phone, like you're not really getting many new features anymore. We've kind of done a lot of the big things that we can do easily. There's still a lot that can be done with these watches, and I'm looking forward to a lot, like the ability to take pictures, which I think will be important, or video. Like Garmin needs LTE on everything. Apple Watch needs buttons. Apple needs to be more durable. Like there are some things that like need to happen. Apple needs better battery life, more training features, whereas Garmin needs more smartwatch features. but the incremental updates that we're getting right now are minor. So like there are people probably with their 935 that are like, I'm still not upgrading to the Fenix 7 because the 935 mostly does everything the Fenix 7 does, at least all the big important stuff. Like, you know, when I talk about like ultra marathon running with the Fenix 7, yes, it has this new feature called stamina. And like, but like, do you need stamina? I don't know. It's another feature that relies on their VO2 max, which if you're running indoors isn't going to help you whatsoever. So like, and it only works for running and biking. So if you're like, I use my 935 and I use it for CrossFit, I don't think you need the Fenix 7. I don't know if you would need that. I really think the older devices are just as good. Now, remember that when I rated these, I did not take into account how important a feature is. Like LTE is a make or break feature for me. So that would give the Apple Watch and Garmin 945 LTE way more points than anything else. If you're like, you know what, the most important feature for me is that new Garmin Stamina feature, then that's the most important watch for you. And you only have one option, which is a version of the Fenix. Well, you can get the other Garmin that was released as well. So you got to think about that. And the other thing that I wanted to take into consideration here when I did this video is that I wanted to look at, so like a lot of these features that these watches are doing, for example, like Apple Watch doesn't have training status or load, and Garmin does a terrible job of it. None of them have like fitness, like what Training Peaks provides. So what I did is I did this same rating system, but I said if I was going to count what third-party apps do for you, how do these devices compare? Like how do they compare? And here's what I came up with. Basically, now all of a sudden the Apple Watch beats out the Garmin Fenix 7, and the Garmin LTE is the highest rated one still. But look how much higher it goes. Because all of a sudden, if I use like the Health Fit app for Apple, which is literally a $5 app, it gives you my TSB, which is like what the data Training Peaks provides. It gives you all kinds of stuff about like load and training status. I can also use apps like Runalyze with either Garmin or Apple, which give you everything. VO2 max, all kinds of features. So it's like, you know, a lot of these features that these devices are coming out with for fitness, I don't necessarily need on my watch. And there are phone apps that like besides Garmin and Apple that do it and maybe even do it better. So it's like, you know, I don't want to pay for those features on the watch when I get it anyway. Like I can use my Garmin 935 and get some of the like almost better results using a third-party app than I'll get from the Fenix 7 using Garmin's apps. And with Apple, they don't even do some of the stuff, but like I just use the Health Fit app or Runalyze or Strava or Training Peaks or whatever you want to Golden Cheetah on your computer, and you actually get just as good or better data than what you'll get with Garmin. So it's like it gets to this point where like, hey, if you're tracking GPS, if you're tracking heart rate, like you're tracking calories, you're tracking distance, you're tracking the weather, like you're going to get a lot of really good data from external third-party apps that make the features on each of these watches matter less and less. And that's where it starts to come down, like what are the features you need? And for me, like I know I need LTE. I really like the ability to have music when I go for runs or bike rides, although I'm inside right now, so I just have a speaker because I'm at my house. So, you know, what are those important things? I don't do like ultra marathon type running, so that's not super important for me. It's something I know is important for other people, but like I don't run more than 5 miles anymore at all. So like I'm not even doing a 10K race. Like if I do a try at this point, it's a sprint. Like I'm much more training for health than I'm training for any kind of competition. So like, you know, certain things, outdoor swimming, I do want outdoor swimming heart rate. So my 935 is just not good, but, you know, so certain things I do need, and you just need to ask yourself, like, what is important? But like, I wouldn't get a watch like this training status load that Garmin has. It's not important to me because I get it from software, and I think Garmin's is problematic. So me personally, as my main watch, I'll tell you what I do. I wear my Apple Watch pretty much 24/7. I wear my Garmin watch when I work out. Apple Watch just doesn't track workouts as well as I find with Garmin. And the Garmin just doesn't do the smart stuff. And honestly, when I'm around the house all day long, the smart stuff is what I care about. So anyway, that's my review. That's my review comparing the Garmin versus Apple ecosystem in 2022. I hope you enjoyed. Later on.